Thank you very much. I hope you do that when I'm finished as well. So, thank you for the invitation to speak at Agile Örebro. I speak a lot in Sweden, but first time in Örebro, about time. So thank you very much. I'm based in the corporate finance organization in a company called Equinor. We used to be called Statoil. I'll come back to the company a little bit later. There's one thing I hope I can leave with you today, and that is the fact that no organization can achieve true business agility without also addressing the stuff that I will talk about today. Simply impossible. So if we can agree on that afterwards, then it's mission completed. When I joined the company back in the early 80s, it was a smaller organization than what it is today. And most small organizations, they want to grow, they want to become big. And some succeed, but many of those who succeed in growing, they discover that we have not only become big, we have also become slow, rigid, bureaucratic. We've lost a lot of that agility, flexibility we had as a smaller organization. And I find an interesting parallel here to the aging process of man. Because as we get older, we do lose a bit of that agility we had as teenagers, at least on the physical side. And I know what I'm talking about. I have some practical experience here. And when it comes to man, we have no choice. You know, in the end, age takes us all. Organizations, however, they have a choice. It is written nowhere that because we are big, we should be slow, rigid, and all the stuff that we don't want to be. So our journey has very much been about trying to find our way back to what we had as a smaller organization without losing the benefits of being big. So our big question, how can we be big and small at the same time? The big question for small organizations who yet haven't grown but want to should be, how can we grow without ending up in the same misery? And it is possible if you're conscious about it, and I have an example for you a little bit later. What I want to share with you today is first the bad news. And given a bit slow here. Is there another one, or okay, here it comes. I want to start with the bad news. Given the kind of group you are, I mean, I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on this, but the point is that traditional management is in deep shit. But there are good news. There are ways out of this. Beyond budgeting. Beyond budgeting is actually a somewhat misleading name. The purpose of beyond budgeting is not necessarily to get rid of budgets. The purpose is to create these organizations that are more adaptive, more human. In order to do that, we need to change traditional management. And what do we find at the core of traditional management? Not just the budgeting process, but also the budgeting mindset. So this is where the name is coming from, but as you will understand, maybe you know already, this is about business agility. Then I want to share with you a few exciting cases before we move to the big case of today, which is ambition to action, which is what we call our process at Equinor. All right, I'd like to continue with a quote from a wise person, Peter Drucker. Most of what we call management is about making it difficult for people to do their job. And I would agree, sometimes that is the problem, we manage too much. Here is another wise person, Russell Eckhoff. Maybe, here it is. Most corporate planning is like a ritual rain dance. It has no effect on the weather, but those who engage in it think it does. Much of the advice and instruction is directed at improving the dancing and not the weather. And trust me, I've done a lot of dancing in my life. My first management job back in old Statoil, 1984, was head of the corporate budget department. I know what I'm talking about. All right, imagine an organization that 100 years ago invented a fantastic machine, state-of-the-art, crucial for the success of this organization. And 50 years ago, this machine started to make some trouble, and today, you can see, it is completely broken. You will all understand that this cannot be a true story. In real life, this would not have happened. In real life, wise persons would have, or wise people would have gotten together and fixed this 50 years ago, or even better, they would have tried to invent something new and better. Because innovation is something we all love, right? Innovation is great. We want to be leading edge, we want to be unique, we want to be right there in the forefront, better than everybody else. Wonderful. But that enthusiasm for innovation seems to be limited to technology, product, maybe services innovation. But there is also something called management innovation. Management innovation, which we are going to talk about today, is about exploring new ways of leading and managing. And management innovation, that is not great. That is scary. Kicking out the budget, are you crazy? And the consequence of this is that it's very crowded on the left-hand side. Everybody is into that kind of innovation. On the management innovation arena, however, that is not yet a crowded place because it is scary. Is there some specific place I should point this one to because it's not working very well? Point towards the screen? Okay. This one, yeah, no? No. It must connect to somewhere. Okay. Anyway, that's a crowded place. That is not yet a crowded place. And that is good news for brave companies who dare to embrace also this kind of innovation, because you can get just as much competitive advantage, performance out of management innovation as you can from technology and product innovation. There are organizations out there who openly admit that we have no competitive advantage whatsoever in our technology and our products. We find it in the way we lead and manage. So performance here is an important word, defined in the right way. And that's the only reason why we embarked on this journey, because we believed back then, when we started out 2005, that it would be good for performance. Today we know. So let's talk more about that important word. And some of you know that I like to use a metaphor here. And I'd like us to move from organizations into traffic. Because in traffic, we would also like to experience good performance, driving to work in the morning, back home. And what I want to experience is a good flow, right? And a safe flow, of course. I simply hate traffic jams. And by the way, I never understood why they call it the rush hour. There's no rush at all. Those cars are standing dead still. But there's so much I don't understand. Anyway, here is something we often meet, put up by traffic authorities to create a safe and good flow. Two questions here. Who is in control and based on which information? And this is the good old-fashioned traffic light. There's no sensors, no high-tech, okay? And the one who's in control here, who makes decisions, is the guy who programmed this light. And where would that person be as you sit there waiting for the green light? Somewhere else. Which information would this programming be based on? It would be based on some historical trends, maybe some forecasts, but it would not be entirely fresh information as you sit there waiting for the green light. But again, the best of intentions, trying to create a safe and good flow. Fortunately, there is an alternative. Very different solution, exactly the same purpose. We are talking about the roundabout. Who is in control here? We are, as drivers. Based on which information? Based on fresh, real-time, here and now information. So very different answers to the same question. So it could be interesting to compare a bit more these two ways of managing. And I've got a few leading questions for you here. First of all, which is normally most efficient? Is the roundabout. It's actually been proven scientifically that the roundabout is more efficient. Which is most difficult to drive in? Which takes most competence? Of course, it's the roundabout. And going back to our organizations, you all know that the things that we have to move towards is more difficult for everybody involved compared to what we need to leave behind. It takes more competence. Is it relevant to talk about values in this setting of traffic? At Equinor, we have something we call the Equinor book. This is our most important document. It talks about who we are, what we believe in, how we work. Everything I will talk about afterwards is in this book. And this book talks a lot about values-based management. Values-based management. And the opposite we can maybe call rules-based management, a bit simplified. The traffic light is a good example of rules-based management. Red is stop and green is drive. We can always discuss yellow, but beyond that, very simple rules-based concept. And if there is a value set, a mindset among drivers waiting for that green light, which is about me first, I don't care about the rest. That mindset is normally not a big problem in front of that light. But in the roundabout, me first, I don't care about the rest, can actually be a big problem. Because here we are much more dependent on everybody involved having a shared, positive, common purpose or wish of wanting this to flow well. We have to help each other. We have to interact with people in a very different way than what we need to do in that roundabout. And finally, when you're in the roundabout, you need to be on. Right? You can't sit there and doze and listen to the radio. You have to be on. You have to be present. Words are important, and there are some words I don't like. Or labels I don't like. One label I don't like is performance management. 2 reasons for that. I find it very negative. If we don't manage your performance, there will be no performance. And secondly, I think there's a lot of illusion of control into this. I think our ability in today's business and people realities to manage performance is actually quite limited compared to what we like to think. But it's not. But if you think about the traffic light here, that is definitely what we talk about. Jesus. Is it possible to go back here? Which I'm trying? Yep. Okay. Would you have another one? Would be wonderful. Managing performance, that's exactly what traffic authorities are doing using the light. In the roundabout, it is about something else. It is about creating conditions for great performance to take place. It is about enabling performance, not managing performance. And this is more than playing with words. These are 2 fundamentally different ways of thinking about these important issues. And it's not a coincidence that you won't find the label performance management in this book. Let's leave traffic. The roundabout is a more self-regulating way of managing. And self-regulation is another important word here. And I would argue that in today's business and people realities, organizations need more self-regulating management models for at least 2 reasons. The first reason has to do with our business environment that today everybody loves to or like to describe as a VUCA environment: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And if we take, and that is true, there's a lot more VUCA out there today than when I started my budget and planning career in the early 80s. If we take this VUCA seriously, it must have implications for how we design our management models, compared to if there is no or little VUCA out there. So it's one reality we need to observe, reflect on, and what we see must have consequences. The other reality we need to reflect on is not external, it's internal. It has to do with people. It has to do with asking ourselves, what kind of people do we generally believe that we have in our organizations? And as you probably know, one set of labels for that important question is theory X and theory Y, Douglas McGregor. These 2 opposing views on people and what motivates people. Theory X, this negative view that most people in an organization is a bunch of potential thieves and crooks, which all must be managed tightly and kept on short leashes, because if not, we know what will happen, right? They will all run away, do a lot of stupid things, and spend money like drunken sailors. Well, if you read McGregor, he was a bit more polite and academic, but I think that's what he meant. Then you have theory Y, very much the opposite view on people, a much more positive view. A view that beyond that fact that there is a lot of education and competence, that most people actually want to do a good job. They want to be involved, they want to be listened to, they want to be treated as adults. And we don't need so far to agree on where does our sympathy lies, X or Y, but even if I have my hopes here. But it should be very easy to agree that if we mainly believe in X, the implications for what our management model should look like would be very different compared to if we mainly believe in Y. So 2 realities we need to observe and reflect on: the world out there, people in the organization. And if we combine the 2, it could look like this. And you recognize the 2 dimensions: people and business environment. And I would argue that traditional management lies in that lower left-hand corner, with a conscious or unconscious view that the world is still a quiet and plannable place, and that most people is on the X side. Wonderful, thank you. It works perfectly, thank you. If we disagree with that the world is still a plannable place and that most people is on the X side, then that is not a place to be. Then we need to move up in that upper right-hand corner by addressing both leadership horizontally and our management processes vertically. And what we need to get out of traditional management is something that's very rigid, it's very detailed, it's very annual, very rules-based, a lot of micromanagement, centralized command and control, there's a lot of secrecy, and there's a strong belief in sticks and carrots as ways to drive performance. Now, you might say that I'm being a bit too hard on traditional management here, but I've been sharing these words with hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and especially outside of Scandinavia. I mean, you won't believe how many looks I get where what I read is, and so what, isn't that the way it has to be? Maybe there was a time when this was the right thing to do. Maybe there still are places around where this is the right thing to do. But for us at Equinor, that discussion is not very interesting. We know that our business environment is way up here, and we actually believe that most people is on the Y side and not on the X side. If not, we have done an awful job on recruitment. But we haven't. We have done a good job. But every time I talk about X and Y, there are some names, some faces popping up in my head. And these guys are in here right now. And those faces belong to colleagues of mine that I actually would maybe put a little bit more on the left-hand side than the right-hand side. I'm not saying they are crooks, but you know what I mean. And maybe there are some names popping up in your heads as well. Because maybe we find some of these people in all organizations, maybe. But that is not the issue. The issue is, where is the majority? If there are some X people around, but they represent a small minority. We cannot let minorities drive the design of our management models. If we believe that most people is on the Y side, that people view must drive the design. Then we need to find other ways of dealing with these X guys. This is just like, you know, in a free society, we are all free citizens. We don't put everybody in jail because we have some criminals among us, right? All right, so what do we need to do? On the leadership side, we need to be more values-based than rules-based. This does not mean that we shouldn't have rules. It simply means that the stronger we are on the value side, the less rules you often need. We need more autonomy. In this VUCA world, there isn't always time to run 9 floors up to get that decision. Then it can be too late. And with these people on board, very often they can make good decisions for themselves. We need more transparency. Very important word. And this is good news for all the scared people I've met over the years who are afraid of leaving this rather comfortable corner in the lower left-hand corner because they are afraid of losing something. They are afraid of losing control. And that fear is real. I can see it in their eyes. But what they maybe haven't understood is that a lot of those controls are nothing but illusion of control. But the fear is still real. So here's some good news for scared people. Transparency can actually be quite an effective control mechanism, a social control mechanism. Right? There is a reason why at least traditional thieves and crooks, they prefer to operate at night, because then it's dark. Nice little story that some of you might have heard. A Swiss pharmaceutical company, Roche, they did a very interesting experiment around travel cost. In a pilot, they kicked out the travel budget, all travel rules and regulations, replaced it with full transparency. So with a few exceptions, everybody could see everything. If you traveled, to where, did you fly, sleep, eat, cheap or expensive? Open for your colleagues to see, and vice versa. Guess what happened with travel cost in that pilot? Came down through a very simple self-regulating control mechanism, which, by the way, must be used with wisdom. If it becomes naming and shaming, then it doesn't work. We do the same at Equinor. We have no travel budgets, full transparency, but we stop on team level. We do not go down to individual level. Last but not least, internal or intrinsic motivation as opposed to external or extrinsic motivation. And I hope it is unnecessary to tell you that the most commonly used extrinsic motivation, individual bonus, is a classical example of a huge gap between what research is telling us and what business practice. I can't think of no other area where that gap is bigger. And you've probably seen the Dan Pink video and heard this, but I mean, just in case, I mean, what research is telling us is that individual bonus can work if 3 conditions are in place. If there's little motivation in the job itself, if it's easy to count, and if quality is more important than quality. So for picking fruit, chasing rats, maybe some simple sales work, maybe, then it works. But moving into knowledge work, then the picture radically changes. And it's other things that motivates more than money. And you probably know the list: mastery, autonomy, purpose, belonging. And what do these things have in common, beyond the fact that they all come for free? It's about leadership. It takes a bit more effort to motivate people through mastery, autonomy, purpose, belonging, than to dangle a bag of money in front of people and say, do this and get that. All right. At Equinor, we have always tried to be a people-oriented, values-based company. Our book says a lot about it. I'm not saying we're perfect, but it is important for us. So our challenge was that as we were growing, we were adding on more and more management processes that had a different message. And it doesn't help to have these theory Y leadership visions if we have theory X management processes, which is the case in a lot of organizations, creating these poisonous gaps between what we preach and what we practice. So our journey has very much been about trying to change our management processes to better reflect what we say about people, what we mean about people, while at the same time trying to make our management processes more VUCA robust. So 2 purposes: more people-focused, more VUCA robust. And here are a few things that you typically need to do in this dimension. Very often the traditional detailed annual budget either has to go or be significantly revamped, because it represents so much of what we find down here in that lower left-hand corner. We need to think differently when where it makes sense, where it's possible. We need to think differently when it comes to setting goals and targets. We need to think a bit more like in football. No football team would say that our most important goals for next season is to score 42 goals and get 39 points. Those are budget goals. They don't think like that. They think in terms of league tables and peers and doing well compared to others. We need more dynamics into our processes. Why on earth shall everything we do here circulate around the fiscal year of January to December, even if that is what runs the show for statutory accounting and taxes? Right? It doesn't make sense. We need more business-driven, more event-driven rhythms and less calendar-driven rhythms. And last but not least, when we shall evaluate performance, that cannot be reduced to an exercise of comparing 2 numbers and then conclude. We need a richer, broader performance language, a holistic performance evaluation. And this, my friends, was a crash course in Beyond Budgeting. This is what it is about, addressing both leadership and management processes in order to become more adaptive, more human. So I've called it business agility here because that is what it is about. It is as simple and as difficult as that. Some organizations and some finance people find that horizontal discussion about people difficult. They are more comfortable working this way with rolling forecasts and KPIs and so on. If that is the case, you can still get many benefits out of this. But if you want the full benefit, you need to address both dimensions. A number of organizations are today on this journey in some form or shape, and I could have talked for hours about fantastic management innovation taking place here, and we don't have the time. So I'm going to limit myself to 2 short examples, and then we need to move on. But by the way, Knowit is on this list, and they've been there for a while, and I hope they've been sticking to what they did some years ago. Sorry. Let's start in Norway. On the left-hand side, you see a company called Miles. It's a Norwegian IT company, business in Norway, Baltics, South Africa, and India. Miles has no budgets, no targets, just a lot of great performance. Their most important process is recruitment. Very simple philosophy. If we get it right at recruitment, the rest follows. So when Miles recruit, they never take less than 10 references. And when management interviews, the whole interview is about the candidate's values and beliefs and attitudes. They don't talk IT at all. They leave testing of IT skills to IT people already on board. They can check for that. And by the way, they have a veto right. If they say no, it's a no. Doesn't matter what management says. If you work for Miles, you can buy whatever PC you want, as expensive as you want, and replace it as often as you want. No PC budgets. You can attend whatever training, conference, seminar you want, as often as you want, wherever in the world. No training budgets, no travel budgets. The only thing the company requires is that when you have bought that PC, when you have returned from that training, you need to post on the internet what you did and the cost of it. So transparency is their only control mechanism. They are very happy with it, no plans about replacing it, but they have one small concern. could it be too effective? Are people buying good enough PCs? Are they taking enough training? But if that is a problem, I would call it a luxury problem. Isn't it nicer to encourage people to buy better PCs, take more training, than to bang them on the head with the budget and say no, no, no? Anyway, amazing company. Very conscious about growing without ending up in the same misery. And that they have succeeded so far. But the veteran here, and you should know since we are in Sweden, is Handelsbanken. And I hope you know that this bank started out already back in 1970. No budgets, no targets, no individual bonus, just a lot of great performance. Such an impressive performance over such a long period. This bank has been performing better than the average of its competitors every single year since 1972. It's among the most cost-effective universal banks in Europe, and the bank has never needed any bailout from the authorities because they messed it up. It can't be a coincidence. Radically different management model, a lot of autonomy, a lot of transparency, and fantastic performance. I know they have some issues right now, and I'm convinced that they will overcome these as well. Handelsbanken and some other banks inspired what became known as beyond budgeting in the late 90s. So the beyond budgeting principles were formulated roughly 3 years before the Agile Manifesto. No link at the time, but as you will see on the next slide here, there are many similarities. And the principles look like this. I do not have time to go in detail, but just a few important messages here. First of all, as you can see, we are addressing both leadership and management processes. And the coherence, the consistency between the two is extremely important. Two classical examples of the opposite. It doesn't help that we on the left-hand side talk loud and warm about we and us and together and team and collaboration and hip hooray. Moving to the right-hand side, rewards principle 10, it's all about individual bonus. Right? Poisonous gaps between what we preach and what we practice. Or the other classical example that we see too often. Doesn't help that we talk equally loud and warm about how fantastic people we have on board, and we would be nothing without you, and we trust you so much. But not that much. Of course we need detailed travel budgets. Are you kidding? Hypocrisy. These are principles. This is not a management recipe. And that's the way it should be. What this should mean for an organization depends on that organization's business, culture, history. I don't like management recipes, and there are a number of them out there. Because in a management recipe, somebody has done all the thinking for you. Your only job is to buy the books, and read them, by the way, hire the consultants, tick the boxes. I find that quite boring and also quite dangerous. So if you like to think for yourself, beyond budgeting, implementation, great stuff. And I see some recipe tendencies in Agile, unfortunately. Be careful. Last point here, two classical misunderstandings around beyond budgeting. Some people think they are both linked to principle 10, cost management, resource allocation. Some people think it's just another way of managing cost. Yes, it is, but there are 11 other principles. It's much broader. Some people think that beyond budgeting, no budget, cost is not important, I can spend whatever I want. Sorry guys, that's not what we are saying. There will always be constraints in an organization, and very often it is money. And the point is that then we need more intelligent, effective ways of optimizing under a constraint compared to what a 100-year-old management technology can offer. Because that is how old beyond budgeting is, or budgeting is. Do you know who invented budgets, by the way, back in roughly 100 years ago? You've heard the name. Mr. James O. McKinsey, the founder of McKinsey Consulting. All right, let's move on. How am I doing on time, by the way? Okay? Okay. So let's move to Equinor. This is us. We used to be called Statoil. The name change is related to a significant change in strategy. We know, first of all, we do not deny climate change, on the contrary. We know we are part of the problem. We think we can be part of the solution, both short-term and long-term. Short-term, it's about more gas to Europe, replacing coal. Immediate positive CO2 effects. Longer-term, it's about using our great engineers into the low-carbon area. And we are good at building big stuff at sea. So we are using that competence to build offshore windmill farms. And we have just built the first floating offshore windmill farm outside of Scotland. When they are floating, you have much more bigger acreage accessible. So the future will be low carbon, and we will be part of it. The only discussion is how long will there still be oil and gas in the energy mix in the world. That's the only kind of disagreement that I sense. Anyway, when we started out in 2005, we were a bit careful showing those 12 principles too widely, because for some people it can be a bit scary. If you scare people, you risk not getting started. So we start today, that's not an issue. I do a lot of internal leadership training, that slide is always with me. But we started out in a less scary place, asking ourselves a very simple question: why do we budget? And if you ask a finance person that question, or a manager in general, most people would come up with 3 different reasons for why we make budgets. We make budgets in order to set targets, financial targets, sales targets, production targets. That's one reason, one purpose. We also use the budget as a kind of forecast of what next year could look like in terms of cash flows, financial capacity. And third, the budget is a resource allocation mechanism, handing out bags of money to the organization on OPEX and on investments. And it might seem very efficient, 3 things in one process, right? Just like a financial Kinder egg. But that's also the problem. What happens if we move into a budget process? We want to understand cash flows for next year, and we ask salespeople out there, what's your best sales number for next year? But everybody knows that the sales number I'm sending upstairs now will come back to me as a sales target. And there's probably a sales bonus linked to hitting that sales target. What could happen with numbers shipped upstairs when people know that I'm in the middle of negotiating my own pay here? Those numbers could start to move. And I've seen it over and over again. Moving to the cost side, we also need to understand the cost side. We ask the same people, other people, what's your best cost or investment number for next year? But everybody knows that this is my only shot at getting access to resources for next year. And last year, they cut my number with 30%. What could then happen with numbers sent upstairs? They could typically move in this direction. And I see some nodding heads here. I think you understand what I mean. This is a problem, not just because it destroys the quality of the numbers, but even more, it stimulates behavior that is at least borderline unethical. The lowballing, the gaming, the sandbagging, the internal negotiations. That's not what we want to see. Fortunately, there is a very simple solution. We still do all these 3 things, but in 3 different processes, because these are different things. A target is an aspiration. It is what we want to happen. A forecast is an expectation. It is what we want to happen. And resource allocation is about optimizing scarce resources in order to get where we want to be. This can become different numbers, but even better, when we have separated, we can start to improve each of these processes in ways not possible when it was all bundled in one process, one number. How can we set better targets that inspire and stretch people without feeling stretched? Some move further on this discussion and say, do we need all these targets? Can we do without targets? And that's a very good discussion. You might have heard of Goodhart's law. When a metric or when a measure gets a target, it ceases to be a good measure or metric. And I know why. Because something happens to behavior when we add targets on stuff. How can we have a lean, simple, unbiased forecasting process where we know we can trust the numbers because we have taken the politics out of this? We know we can trust the numbers. A forecast is just a forecast. It's not a bid into a target negotiation, and it is not an application for resources. We have different processes for that. Some companies continue that discussion. Do we need all these forecasts? Thinking no estimates, right? Also a very interesting discussion here. And last but not least, how can we find better ways of optimizing scarce resources? And here are some examples of what we do. Just a very quick version. When it comes to projects, and projects for us means big stuff. There's a lot of steel and concrete. We do not have an annual investment budget where we decide everything in the autumn the year before. We are going to invest this much, split on these projects that we hand out as annual buckets of money to the organization. We don't do that. It's too early, it's too high up. Instead, the bank is always open. The line can already forward a project for approval. If you get a yes or a no, depends on 2 things. How good is your project, and can we afford it as things look today? And that information is coming out of something we call dynamic forecasting. We have a continuous dynamic forecasting process where people update their forecast when stuff happens instead of that the calendar is saying first quarter. And how can we do all of this more event-driven, less calendar-driven? This has been a useful slide for us because people who say that, well, it's unthinkable to stop budgeting, then we can tell them we still do what the budget tried to do for us. But because we have separated, we can do each one in much, much better ways. How scary is that? So let me give you a quick example of better ways of setting targets. Now we are talking corporate targets. Here is an example of much more VUCA-robust targets. These are the two our main financial KPIs. You can discuss both of them when it comes to, but that's not the point here. The point is that we think in relative terms, not in absolute terms. There's not a target on return on capital of, say, 12.5%. Doesn't help that we hit 12.5 if competition is doing 13 or 14, and vice versa. The target on both of these, it's not a secret, it is to be above average on both of these every year, which is actually quite tough every year. But we have been more or less able to do that. These two drive the common bonus scheme we have in the organization. We stole that idea from Handelsbanken, by the way. Okay, let's finish off here with a process where all of this comes together. It's called ambition to action. 3 purposes. It's about translating strategies and also handling risk. That's a new feature here. We also use this project to secure this agility I've been talking about, and last but not least, to activate important words in this book. Then there are some steps here where some tell us that, well, we have something similar, but I think the way we do this might be different. We start with translating strategy into strategic objectives. So what does success look like on a medium-term time horizon? And here we try to avoid playing bullshit bingo. We try to avoid the excellence, the world class, and all the worn-out words. We are encouraging people to use a simple and straightforward language that hits people just as much in their stomach and heart as up here. Then it's time for risks. So what kind of risks can jeopardize achieving these objectives? What other risks do we have in the business? Then it's time for actions. What kind of actions do we need to achieve those objectives, to mitigate risk? And very often it's one and the same thing. Then it's time for measurement indicators. The only problem with measurement is that measurement alone moves nothing. Nothing happens just because we measure. You don't lose weight simply by weighing yourself. And I know because I've tried. And that was not a big success. And it didn't help when my wife told me that, Bjarte, maybe you didn't stand there long enough. Well, that would have been one kind of action. But the point is that nothing happens before we do something. That's why it's called ambition to action. And the reason we've called these indicators and not KPIs is to remind ourselves that that is what they are, key performance indicators. They are indicating that we are moving towards those objectives. They are not necessarily telling the full truth. They are not called KPTs, key performance truth. They are called key performance indicators, and we must treat them accordingly. They cannot run the show. Last but not least, what does this mean for you and me, the teams we are in? And here is an example of activating important words in the book. The very first words, the way we deliver is as important as what we deliver. And with the way we deliver, we talk about the values in this book, and the weighting between the two in all consequences for your career and for your pay is 50-50. This is an example of an ambition to action. I mean, forget the content. This is an older corporate version. It's a bit boring because it's on corporate level, but you recognize the first 4 steps from the previous slide. And as you can see, it's not very financially oriented. Yes, we do have some financial ambitions about creating value down here, and the 2 indicators, league tables, you will see on the right-hand side. But in order to achieve that, we need to do well against customers and markets. That will never happen unless we're good on internal operations. That will never happen unless we're good on people in organization, and in our case, safety, security, sustainability. We have around 600 of these in the organization, and towards the end here, a few minutes on this slide to get across 2 other areas where we try to be different. The first has to do with alignment. How do you create that red thread from a corporate strategy to team priorities? And the easy way is called cascading. Sitting on corporate level and simply instructing all the way down, this is your content, and when it comes to the numbers, imposing the numbers, and afterwards, we finance people, we can add up all the local numbers, and they matches the corporate number down to the last decimal, and we can sleep well at night. We are going to deliver because it all hangs together. I wish it was that simple. In our culture, it isn't. It's the other way around. That top-down cascading easily destroys everything related to involvement, commitment, motivation. If your own ambition to action only is a landing ground for instruction from above, that ownership walks out the door, and people spend their energy working around this stupid management process in order to do their job. That's not what we want. At the same time, we need alignment. We create alignment through what we call translation. And this is more than playing with words. Translation means that when there is a team out here that shall make their own ambition to action, they would look around, one level up, further up, maybe all the way to corporate, left and right, and have a deep and good discussion. What does our ambition to action need to look like in order to support those we have a relationship to? When it comes to ambition level, when it comes to direction. If such a translation should go wrong, of course the level above should do what they are paid for, but it's not the problem. And the reason is probably transparency. All of these ambition to actions are open, accessible for all employees. There are some share-sensitive information, some confidential information we have to close, but the principle is, as much as possible, transparent, open. There should be no place to hide with a stupid ambition to action. So we use transparency as a control mechanism, but even more importantly, as a learning mechanism. We want people to surf around and be inspired by others, right? And how can you do that if everything is secret? It's not mandatory to have an ambition to action. These teams decide for themselves. If it's mandatory, it becomes part of the control system. Now, you might think that 600 is a lot, and this sounds very bureaucratic, but nobody has a relationship to 600. You have a relationship to those around us. This is scalable. It doesn't matter if it's 600 or 6,000. Rhythm, we don't have an annual process here, or annual rhythm. These teams update their own ambition to actions when stuff happens in their own business reality that they think justify an update. When it comes to content, when it comes to numbers, they can even change their targets when there is a need for it. If targets have lost their meaning, impossible to achieve, piece of cake. But it's not an anarchy. We have a very simple control mechanism. If you want to change something that's big, again, you can do it at any time, but if it's big, you still need an approval one level up. It's not a signature, it's not a stamp, but you need to talk to someone. If it's a small change, you just inform to the same level at a suitable time. Big or small, always make sure that you inform others affected by your changes. I recall when this was introduced, people said, great, I like it, wonderful. But by the way, what is big and what's small? And somebody wanted us at corporate level to define that for everybody. Impossible. So we've delegated it, which means that there could be somebody here in one part of the organization that have a different definition of big and small than somebody else. But that's okay, as long as it works both places. Back to the roundabout, we would like this to be as self-regulating as possible. The more this can run by itself under the purpose of, this is, for me, this is about helping these teams to help themselves in managing their own business, the better. We shouldn't abdicate from corporate. We shall intervene if needed, support if needed, but this should be the business's way to help themselves to manage themselves. Last but not least, holistic performance evaluation. Very important part of the model. And holistic here means two things. First of all, 50-50 between what we deliver and how we deliver. But it also means that when we shall evaluate what we have delivered, which is defined by your ambition to action, that cannot be reduced to an exercise where we are adding up the number of red and green indicators and then conclude. That is too narrow, too dumb. We might start with adding up. But again, these are indicators, not necessarily telling the full truth. So we need to look beyond measurement, take off the measurement glasses and pressure test what we have measured before we conclude by asking some simple questions. I see that your indicator is green, but have we really moved towards those objectives? How ambitious were those targets? Has there been significant changes in assumptions, tailwind, headwind that we should take into account? How was risk handled and what's the sustainability of what you have delivered? So you need that assessment on top of measurement before we can conclude. Some of these questions can also be applied in the behavior dimension here. And this used to, some years ago, to end up in a rating scale, both dimensions, 1 to 5. That we kicked out, and I'm very happy. I never liked it, and very few others did. So now there's a much more kind of looser link to the two purposes here, which always has been development and rewards, which is for most people your merit base pay adjustment. For some people, it could also be individual bonus. Unfortunately, I don't like it, but you can't win all your fights. All right, that is what I wanted to share with you. That you've just heard the very short version. The long version is out there in this book, more of everything. And here are my contact details if you want to discuss further, or if you want to check out Beyond Budgeting more. We have I'm the chairman of our global network, but we have a Swedish partner called Equinor. Great small consultancy company coming from Gothenburg, but they have also offices in Stockholm. And again, if anybody wants to invite us in for a discussion in your own management teams, I mean, then please take contact. We do that a lot. Thank you very much. It's a good question. So can it start, does it have to be from the top, or can it start other places? And I would argue that yes, it can. It is possible to run pilots here. It is possible for a part of the organization, a business unit or business area head, to say that, I mean, this is how I want to manage, right? So corporate still running the game. I'm taking off my umbrella, protecting my organization for as much dumb stuff as possible coming from above. So when I turn around and manage, this is how I try to manage. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is possible. And I think there's not enough kind of rebellion around middle managers. Very often I think their room to move is bigger than what they think. They can play along with the big system and protect their own organization and do more sensible stuff internally. While you are thinking, I mean, just one more reflection from my side. You know, and I know that this stuff is going to happen, right? It is going to happen. I don't care if it's going to be called Beyond Budgeting or Business Agility or whatever, but it will happen. And in 20 years' time, we will all smile when we look back at what was mainstream management back in 2019. Just like today we smile about the days before the internet, which isn't that long ago. So it will happen. And as organizations, we can choose, do we want to be early movers and get a competitive advantage out of this? Or do we want to be dragged into this as one of the last ones? And I know what I would have chosen. I think that's a no-brainer. Yeah. Well, if you look at that league table that I showed, I mean, we have been, above average almost all the time. And last year we ended up in the first quartile, which is actually quite tough because these are, it's a tough competition. But we also see it in other areas. We are a very popular employer, not just in Norway. In the US, where we are quite big, we recruit people from our competitors, the BPs and the Shells and the Exxons. And people come and want to work for us because they know that we operate in a different way. So even if this might be again against what today is traditional US or American business culture, the pool of differently thinking Americans is big enough for us to recruit from, and we haven't drained it yet, that's for sure. So it is a competitive advantage in that sense as well. We also saw that when the oil price collapsed, we could move much faster than what our competitors were able to do. So I think that was a good reminder for a lot of people about the agility that this model yeah. I don't know because we are not finished. Oh, seriously, sorry? Well, we started in 2005. But this is a journey where you get braver along the way. We didn't kick out the calendar year immediately. That we waited a few years and then we did that. And now we are having this discussion about targets or no targets, a discussion that we couldn't have had 5 years ago. So everybody gets braver along the way, and in 5 years' time we will have discussions that I don't know today what they will be. And I find that very, very fascinating. But you can have a big bang on processes. You can kick out the budget and separate the budget purposes overnight, like we did. But when it comes to what needs to happen up here and here, and here in people, it will always be an evolution, even if you have a revolution on the management process side. All right, I will be around in the break here if there are some other questions. So thank you very much.